You are not my son. 4 words. Tywin Lannister's last 4 words. The most powerful man in Westeros. The man who ruled the 7 kingdoms for 20 years from behind the backs of 2 kings. The man who destroyed the reigns of Castamere and drowned the Tarbecks in their own castle. This man died in the privy from a crossbow bolt fired by a dwarf's hand. And the last thing he said to his son was, "You are not my son." Most viewers hear these words as a final insult, a final spit in the face of an unloved child. But what if Tywin wasn't insulting Tyrion? What if he was telling the truth? There is a theory that claims Tyrion Lannister's real father is not Tywin, but Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King. And this theory has evidence that is hard to ignore, but there are also counter-arguments that could bury it. Today we'll examine both. Honestly, no exaggeration. And by the end, you'll decide for yourselves whose son this dwarf really is. Before we delve into the clues and evidence, let's establish what we know for certain. The solid ground of the canon from which we can proceed. Tyrion Lannister, the 3rd child of Tywin, and Joanna Lannister, born in the year 273 after the conquest, a dwarf from birth. His mother, Joanna, died giving birth to him. Tywin never forgave her for that. This is something every viewer knows. But behind the scenes of this family drama lies a story that the series has barely touched upon, whilst the books recount it in fragments, hints, and half-phrases. A story about Aerys Targaryen and Joanna Lannister. In the book A World of Ice and Fire, and in the 5th volume of the saga, A Dance with Dragons, we learn the following. Joanna Lannister, Tywin's cousin, served as a lady-in-waiting at Queen Rhaella's court in her youth. And the young Prince Aerys, the future Mad King, had feelings for her. Rumors circulated that Joanna and Aerys had been close even before Tywin's wedding. Grandmaster Pycelle insists that these rumors are groundless, claiming that a man as proud as Tywin would never have married a woman with such a reputation. But Pycelle is, to put it mildly, an unreliable witness. What we know for certain is that at Tywin and Joanna's wedding, in the year 263 of the Aerys era, after having had a fair bit to drink, he joked that it was a pity the custom of the rite of the first night had long since been abolished. And during the ceremony of undressing the bride, he allowed himself, to quote Barristan Selmy, unwarranted liberties. Barristan does not specify exactly what lies behind the word liberties. He stumbles over his words. He cannot say it out loud to Daenerys. And this stumble, this pause, which is easy to overlook, means a great deal to our theory. Later, Rhaella relieved Joanna of her duties as a lady-in-waiting. No official reason was given, but the book states that Rhaella did not wish her ladies-in-waiting to become the king's whores, and Joanna was neither the first nor the last whom Rhaella dismissed for this reason. What does this say about Aerys? That Joanna was not the only victim of his attentions, but by all accounts, she was the one to whom he was most attached. For even years after her departure, when Joanna gave birth to twins at Casterly Rock, Aerys reacted with a remark that must have made Tywin's teeth grind. "It seems I married the wrong woman." And he ordered Tywin to bring the children to court, and their mother as well, for it has been a long time since I last admired that beautiful face. These are not the words of a man who has forgotten. These are the words of a man who remembers, who waits, who believes he has a right. And Joanna left for Casterly Rock for a long time, but not forever. 9 years later, in the year 272, Joanna returned to King's Landing. She had come for the tournament marking the 10th anniversary of Aerys's reign. She brought her 6-year-old twins, Jaime and Cersei. And it was here that a significant scene took place. Aerys, drunk once again, asked Joanna in front of everyone whether breastfeeding the twins had ruined her beautiful breasts, which had once been so high and proud. Tywin was furious. The next morning, he attempted to resign as Hand of the King. Aerys refused to accept his resignation. Now for the maths. Joanna was in the capital in the year 272. Tyrion is born in 273. The time between Joanna's visit to King's Landing and Tyrion's birth is exactly the length of a pregnancy. A coincidence? Perhaps. But Martin doesn't like coincidences. He likes clues hidden in plain sight. Here's what we know for certain. Aerys wanted Joanna, He took liberties with her. The timeline adds up. Tywin hated his son from the moment he was born. Upon learning of Tyrion's birth, Aerys said that the gods had punished Tywin by sending him a freak to teach him humility. Try reading that sentence differently, not as the malice of an enemy, but as the smug satisfaction of a father who knows that this is his child. The tone of the sentence changes, doesn't it? These are all facts. From here on, we enter the realm of theory, and this is where we need to be particularly careful, because the first clue is already waiting for us. And it's not hidden in history, but within Tyrion himself. Open the first book, the very first chapter, featuring Jon Snow. Jon looks at Tyrion, and this is what he sees: a dwarf with a disproportionately large head and a coarse, flattened face. One eye is green, the other black, and his hair is so light it looks almost white. Stop for a second. A green eye and a black eye. All Lannisters have green eyes. All Targaryens have violet eyes. And here's the interesting bit. In real life, a very dark shade of violet is practically indistinguishable from black. Martin knows this. The books establish that dark violet eyes can appear black under certain lighting conditions. Shayera Starfish, a Targaryen bastard, is described in exactly the same way, one green and one dark. Heterochromia is not a typical Lannister trait, but it is found in people with mixed Targaryen blood. Now, the hair, the Lannisters have golden hair, literally golden. This is emphasized in every book. But Tyrion's hair is so light it looks white, not golden, white. Closer to the silvery blonde of the Targaryens than to the gold of the Lannisters. And here a skeptic might say, hang on. Tommen, who is 100% Lannister by blood, is also described as a child with very light hair. That's true. It's a fair counter-argument. Lannister genes are quite capable of producing very light blonde hair without any Targaryen admixture. Tyrion's hair, on its own, proves nothing. But the eyes are a different matter altogether. Heterochromia, one green, one black, or dark purple, is unusual. It sets Tyrion apart from the rest of the family. It's a detail that Martin chose deliberately. He could have made both eyes green. He could have made them any color. But he gave Tyrion two different eyes. One from his Lannister mother, one from someone else. If that isn't a clue, then what is? In my view, Tyrion's appearance isn't proof in itself, but it's not nothing either. It's the first building block, a detail that means nothing on its own, but takes on a whole new meaning when other details come into play. And the next detail is more significant, because it's not about his appearance. It's about what's going on inside Tyrion's head. Bear that in mind, because it will come up again later. But for now, let's talk about dragons. In the first book, Tyrion tells Jon Snow something on the wall that's easy to miss. He says, "When I was a boy, I used to light fires in the dungeons of Casterly Rock and watch the flames for hours, imagining they were dragon fire. Sometimes he imagined his father burning in that fire. Sometimes his sister. He asked his uncle to give him a dragon for his name day, a small one, like himself. And he burst into tears when he was told that the last dragon had died 100 years ago. When you read this for the first time, you think, well, the child was just daydreaming, nothing out of the ordinary. But read this scene again, bearing in mind the context of the theory. A little boy, hated by his father, despised by his sister, sits in the dark, staring into the fire and imagining himself as a lost Targaryen prince. Or a dragon lord from Valyria." Martin puts these words into Tyrion's mouth in the very first book. And here's what's truly interesting. Jon Snow, who, as we now know, really is a secret Targaryen, looks at Tyrion in this scene with an expression described as a mixture of horror and admiration. And Tyrion laughs and tells him, "Don't look at me like that, bastard. I know your secret. You've been dreaming of the same thing." Two secret Targaryens are talking about dragons in the first chapter of the first book, and neither of them knows it. Coincidence? If it is a coincidence, then Martin has earned himself the Nobel Prize in Literature for it. But wait, the skeptic might say, plenty of people dream of dragons. Children have their fantasies. That's no proof of Targaryen blood. And the skeptic is right. A child's obsession with dragons, in itself, proves nothing. Quentyn Martell wanted to tame a dragon too, and he was burned to death. Nettles from fire and blood tamed the dragon sheep stealer, and by all accounts was not a Targaryen. But here's the interesting thing. Tyrion's fascination with dragons didn't end in childhood. It continued. On his way to Winterfell, he reads a book about the properties of dragon bone. In Meereen, in the series, he goes down to Viserion and Rhaegal, who are chained up, and removes their shackles with his bare hands. The dragons who burned Quentyn Martell alive for trying to approach them allowed Tyrion to touch them. Yes, in the series, this can be put down to plot convenience, but Martin does nothing without a reason. Now let's return to the point I asked you to bear in mind. In the 5th book, whilst Tyrion is traveling with Illyrio Mopatis in a palanquin, he has a strange dream. He is fighting in the hills of Westeros side by side with Barristan the Brave and Bitter Steel, whilst dragons circle overhead. In this dream, Tyrion has 2 heads, both without noses. His father leads the enemy army, and Tyrion kills him again. Then he kills his brother Jaime, and only when the battle ends does he realize that his second head is crying. This dream can be interpreted in various ways as a metaphor for inner conflict, as a vision of a future war, but one detail stands out: the dragons. In his dream, Tyrion sees dragons above the battlefield. In Martin's world, the Targaryens are renowned for their prophetic dreams of dragons, dragon dreams. This is precisely the kind of dream Aegon the Conqueror had before he decided to conquer Westeros. These are the very dreams Daenerys had. And now Tyrion is having them too. And then there's Moqorro, the Red Priest who rescues Victarion Greyjoy from the ocean. When Tyrion asks him what he sees in the flames, Moqorro replies, "Dragons. Old and young, true and false, light and dark, and you, a small man with a great shadow, growling amongst them all. Tyrion amongst the dragons, growling, not running away, not hiding, but growling, as if he were one of them. To be honest, this clue is impressive. A child's obsession, dragon dreams, the Red Priest's prophecy. Each can be explained on its own without the theory. Together, they paint a picture that is hard to ignore. But before we jump to conclusions, let's look at what Tywin himself says. Because his words are perhaps the most powerful weapon in this theory. Tywin Lannister was a man who controlled everything. Every word, every gesture, every decision. He never said anything by chance. And this is what he says to Tyrion in the 3rd book, when Tyrion claims Casterly Rock by right of inheritance. "You ask about this? You, who killed your mother at birth. You are a wretched, ugly, spiteful creature, full of envy, lust, and base treachery. The laws of men grant you the right to bear my name and my colors, for I cannot prove that you are not mine." Reread that last sentence. I cannot prove that you are not mine. Not you are my son, but I find you repulsive. Not you are a Lannister, even though you bring shame upon our name, but rather, I cannot prove that you are not mine. This is the language of a man who suspects, who allows for the possibility, who perhaps knows but cannot produce proof. Tywin Lannister, with his obsession with lineage and the purity of his bloodline, tells his son, "I tolerate you only because I cannot prove otherwise." And here's another quote, also from the 3rd book. In another conversation, Tywin says to Tyrion, "The day you were born, I wanted to carry you out to sea and let the waves take you. Instead, I let you live. And I raised you as my own son. Because you're a Lannister, raised you as my own son. Not because you are my son, but I raised you as my own. Do you feel the difference?" That is the phrasing of a foster father, a man who has taken in a child but does not consider him his own. And note the logic of the phrase. Tywin does not say, "I let you live because you are my son." He says, "I let you live and raised you as my son because you are a Lannister by name, by formal affiliation to the house, not by blood." For Tywin, who had been obsessed with legacy his whole life, the difference between my blood and the bearer of my name was colossal. And he chose the latter. Compare this with the way Ned Stark spoke of Jon. Ned was lying to protect someone else's child, but he spoke in terms of kinship and blood ties. Tywin may have been telling the truth, but he spoke in terms of formality and duty to the house. 2 fathers, 2 secrets, 2 languages. It's a parallel that's hard to miss. And finally, his last words. In the outhouse, with a crossbow bolt in his stomach, Tywin looks at Tyrion and says, "You are not my son." Can this be read as an insult? Of course. Can it be read as the truth that burst forth at the moment of death, when control was lost and only the bare essence remained? That is possible too. Martin wrote this scene in such a way that both interpretations work, and that is mastery. It is no accident. But we must be honest here. There is a counter-argument, and it is a serious one. Tywin hated Tyrion for perfectly understandable reasons that require no theory. Tyrion killed Joanna at birth. Tyrion was a dwarf, a disgrace to a great house. Tyrion drank, frequented brothels, and made witticisms where he should have kept quiet. For Tywin, obsessed with the idea of an impeccable legacy, this was more than enough to hate his son. The words, "You are not my son," may simply be the culmination of that hatred. A disownment, not an acknowledgement. And yet, the phrase, "I cannot prove that you are not mine," remains. It sticks out from the text like a crossbow bolt from a stomach, and it cannot be explained solely by hatred for his son's ugliness and dissolute lifestyle. Tywin did not say, "You bring shame upon my name." He said, "I cannot prove it." So far, we've been examining the clues one by one. His childlike appearance, his obsession with dragons, Tywin's words. Each is interesting, but none is conclusive. Now let's piece them together with the timeline and the story of Aerys and Joanna, and see what picture emerges. Aerys had desired Joanna since his youth. He took liberties with her at her wedding. Queen Rhaella banished Joanna from court because she did not want Aerys to turn her ladies-in-waiting into whores. Joanna lived at Casterly Rock for 9 years. Then, in the year 272, she returned to the capital for a tournament. Aerys, drunk, publicly insulted her by asking about her breasts. Tywin tried to resign. A few months later, Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion. The theory suggests that something happened between Aerys and Joanna during that visit. Something we didn't see, because none of the narrative characters were present at the time. Aerys's remark about Joanna's breasts may not have been merely a crude joke, but a prelude to what happened later. And Tywin, having learnt of everything that morning, tried to resign. Not because he had been insulted, but because something irreparable had happened. This is a logical construct. It is based on facts, but fills in the gaps with assumptions. And here we must be clear, we don't have a scene. There is no chapter where we see exactly what happened between Aerys and Joanna. Martin deliberately left that space blank. He gave us enough material to suspect, but not enough to be certain. And perhaps that was his intention. Because now let's talk about the strongest counterargument, the one that throws the whole theory into doubt. If Tyrion isn't Tywin's son, he isn't a patricide. He isn't a regicide in the moral sense. He's simply a man who killed his tormentor. And this is where things get really interesting. Because this isn't just a counter-argument. It's a potential death knell for the whole theory. Tywin's murder is one of the greatest scenes in the entire saga. Not because a dwarf shoots the Great Lord with a crossbow, whilst he's on the lavatory, though that is brilliant. But because a son kills his father. That is the true weight of the scene. Tyrion has spent his whole life seeking Tywin's approval. His whole life, he has tried to prove that he is worthy of being a Lannister. And in the end, the only thing he has proven is that a crossbow bolt does not distinguish whose blood flows through the archer's veins. This is patricide, kinslaying. In Martin's world, there is no crime more terrible. No man is as cursed as he who has killed his own blood relative. If Tyrion is the son of Aerys rather than Tywin, the whole scene loses half its impact. Tyrion is no longer a regicide in the full sense of the word. He did not kill his own father. He killed a man who had tormented him all his life, but who was not bound to him by blood. It is still murder. It is still horrific. But it is a different kind of horror, less profound, less complex, less Martin-esque. Martin loves gray areas. He loves situations where the reader feels both sympathy and horror at the same time. Tyrion killing his own father is precisely such a situation. We understand why he did it. We might even be glad that Tywin got what he deserved. Yet at the same time, we feel that something irreparable has happened, that Tyrion has crossed a line from which there is no return. The 5th book confirms this. After Tywin's murder, Tyrion descends into drunkenness, cruelty, and self-destruction. He is haunted by what he has done. If Tywin were not his father, this breakdown would be less justified, less convincing, less painful. And here's another thematic point. Tyrion's entire story arc is built on the fact that he is a Lannister whom the Lannisters do not want. He bears the name and sigil that are rightfully his. Yet his family rejects him. Tywin's irony lies in the fact that Tyrion, whom he hated, turned out to be his very own son. Smart, calculating, ruthless. Jenna Lannister, Tywin's sister, says it outright. Tyrion is Tywin's true son. Jaime doesn't count, Cersei doesn't count. It is Tyrion who has inherited his father's wit and shrewdness. To make Tyrion the son of Aerys would be to destroy this irony. It would mean that Tywin was right to reject him. It would mean that Jenna was wrong. It means that the most striking conflict in Lannister history, the conflict between a father who does not see himself in his son and a son who is his very image, was based on biological truth, not on Tywin's blindness. Opponents of the theory put forward yet another argument, and it hits the mark too. If Tyrion Targaryen is a Targaryen, it undermines the revelation of Jon Snow's secret. We already have one hidden Targaryen. Adding a second one would turn this plot device from a narrative miracle into a formula. R plus L equals D was built up from the very first book, carefully and methodically, with dozens of clues that come together to form a single picture. A plus D equals T only truly emerged in the 5th book, through a single line from Barristan Selmy and material from a world of ice and fire. The scale of the buildup is incomparable. Some critics believe this proves that Martin did not plan this revelation. Others object. Perhaps he deliberately made the clues more subtle so that the impact would be more unexpected. That's a powerful argument. I can see his point, and I understand why many fans believe it settles the matter. But here's what's been nagging at me. Martin didn't leave all those hints there by accident. The timeline, the liberties, the hair, the eyes, Tywin's words, the dragon dreams, Mokoro. If Martin didn't want us to suspect anything, why did he give us so many clues? Let's talk about what Martin himself might have had in mind, and about how this theory fits into the structure of his story. At one of his fan meetings, Martin uttered a phrase that has been quoted for over 20 years. He was asked about the prophecy that the dragon has 3 heads, and he replied, 3 heads, yes, but the third one won't necessarily be a Targaryen. Not necessarily. It's a phrase that opens the door without closing it. The 2 heads are, in all likelihood, Daenerys and Jon, who turned out to be Rhaegar's son. The third head remains an open question, and Tyrion, with his obsession with dragons, with the prophecy of Mokoro, and with the very fact that the dragons allowed him to touch them, looks like the most obvious candidate. But the phrase, not necessarily a Targaryen, can be interpreted in 2 ways. First, the third head is a Targaryen whom nobody knows about, that is Tyrion. Second, the third head is a person who isn't a Targaryen at all, but is still connected to dragons. Nettles from Fire and Blood tamed a dragon without a drop of Targaryen blood. So, you don't necessarily have to be a Targaryen to be one of the dragon's heads. Martin didn't give a straight answer, as usual, but the very way the question was phrased suggests that he had been thinking about it, that the 3-headed structure is built into the saga's architecture, and within that architecture, Tyrion occupies a position that is far too convenient to be a mere coincidence. Now, about the parallels. 3 mothers who gave birth to children and died. Joanna gave birth to Tyrion and died. Lyanna gave birth to Jon and died. Rhaella gave birth to Daenerys and died. 3 children whose mothers paid for their birth with their lives. If Tyrion really is Aerys' son, then all 3, Daenerys, Jon, and Tyrion, are Targaryen children born at the cost of their mothers' lives. It is a beautiful symmetry. Martin loves symmetry, but beautiful does not mean true. There is another parallel. Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister are like mirrors of one another. Ned raised another man's child, Jon, with love, concealing his origins for the sake of his safety. Tywin raised, perhaps, another man's child with hatred, either not knowing for certain or knowing but unable to prove it. One rejected blood ties for the sake of love. The other accepted blood ties that may not have existed because the honor of the house demanded it. 2 fathers, 2 bastards, Two poles of the same story. And here's another point worth dwelling on. Tywin destroyed the House of Rain of Castamere for disobedience. He had the Tarbes drowned for their insolence. He ordered the killing of Elia Martell and her children during the capture of King's Landing. Yet Tywin did not openly seek revenge against Aerys, the man who, if the theory is correct, committed a monstrous act with Joanna for 20 years. He waited, he endured, he continued to serve his hand for several more years after Joanna's visit, and only left when Aerys took Jaime into the Kingsguard. And when the time finally came, Tywin did not merely betray Aerys. He did so in the cruelest possible way. He deceived him, letting the army into the capital under the guise of an ally, and allowed his son Jaime to deliver the final blow. Viewed through the lens of the theory, the destruction of House Targaryen takes on a personal flavor. It is not merely political opportunism. Though Tywin was undoubtedly an opportunist, it is the settling of an old score. Another interesting point that is rarely discussed in the context of this theory, Tywin ordered Gregor Clegane to kill Rhaegar's children during the capture of King's Landing, little Aegon and tiny Rhaenys, the children of a man who was in turn the son of Aerys. Could this be interpreted as a form of indirect revenge? Tywin destroyed Aerys' offspring with the same ruthlessness with which Aerys, according to the theory, had defiled his own family, blood for blood, children for a child. This is, of course, speculation, but it fits Tywin's character so perfectly that it sends shivers down the spine. The Red Priest Makoro sees Tyrion surrounded by dragons. Barristan Selmy, the last knight of the Old World, tells Daenerys about her father's affair with Joanna, a prophetic dream in which Tyrion fights side by side with Barristan, whilst dragons circle above them. All these are threads that Martin has woven through 5 books. They may lead to a revelation, or they may be a red herring, one of those with which Martin so skillfully peppers his books. All the evidence has been gathered. All the checks have been carried out. Let's put it all together and see what picture emerges. If the theory is correct, this is what actually happened. In the year 272, Joanna Lannister arrived in King's Landing for a tournament. Aerys, whose obsession with her had not waned during their 9 years of separation, seized the moment. What transpired between them was not consensual. Tywin found out, perhaps from Joanna herself, perhaps from one of the courtiers. His attempt to resign was not a reaction to a verbal insult. It was a reaction to something far more terrible. But he could not speak out openly. He could not accuse the king. That would have meant death for the entire House Lannister. When Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion, Tywin looked at that ugly child and saw more than just his wife's murderer. He saw proof of what had happened, a living, screaming reminder of the worst night of his life. And he could neither prove it nor get rid of the child. Because formally, Tyrion was born in wedlock. Formally, he is a Lannister. And Tywin, a man for whom the family's reputation was more important than anything else, could not publicly announce what had happened to his wife. This explains why Tywin's hatred for Tyrion was so deep, so irrational, so disproportionate. Many fathers in Westeros lost their wives in childbirth and did not hate their children for it. Tywin himself was a harsh, cold, calculating man. He was no madman. His hatred for Tyrion goes beyond the rational if we explain it solely by Tyrion's deformity and Joanna's death. But it becomes entirely logical if there is something more behind it. If the theory is correct, then "you are not my son" was true. "I cannot prove that you are not mine" was true. And Tywin's monstrous cruelty towards Tyrion, the business with Tysha, the public humiliations, the refusal to hand over Casterly Rock, all of it was revenge, not against his son, but against a living reminder of his own powerlessness in the face of the king who had taken away what Tywin valued most of all. But if that theory is wrong, and I must be honest, this version works too. Tywin, having lost the only person he ever loved, and in return, receiving a child who embodies everything he despises. Weakness, ugliness, scandal. Tyrion, Tywin's true son, rejected by a father who is incapable of seeing his own reflection in the mirror. That is a powerful story too, perhaps even more powerful. And this brings us to the main question. Here's what I think. Honestly, After having gone through every lead, every counterargument, every comparison, this theory is more likely to be true than not. But there is one caveat that changes everything. The evidence is too consistent to be a coincidence. The timeline, Barristan's words, Tyrion's appearance, dragon dreams, Mokoro, Tywin's line, "I cannot prove that you are not mine." Martin methodically, from book to book, from chapter to chapter, lays out the building blocks that lead to a single conclusion. He does this too carefully and for too long for it all to be a red herring. In a world where Ars plus L equals D turned out to be true, A plus D, Aerys plus Daenerys, equals T, looks like the second half of the same equation. On a scale of plausibility, I would rate this theory as more likely than not. The evidence tips the balance. Alternative explanations exist for each piece of evidence individually, but not for all of them taken together. There are too many coincidences, which cease to be mere coincidences when you look at them side by side. What could confirm the theory once and for all? If, in the Winds of Winter, Tyrion rides a dragon, if one of the characters who knows about the past, Varys, Ilario, the Red Priests, tells him the truth, if Martin reveals the purpose of Joanna's visit to the capital through a flashback or someone's recollections, what could disprove it? If a Martin explicitly shows that Tywin and Joanna conceived Tyrion before the visit to King's Landing, or if the dragon's third head turns out to be someone completely different, Bran, who has possessed the dragon, or someone else we haven't considered. But here's the catch. Even if Tyrion is biologically Aerys' son, that doesn't make him a Targaryen. He is a Lannister. He has always been a Lannister. Tywin raised him, he killed Tywin, and he spent his whole life fighting for Tywin's approval. Biology doesn't define who you are. That is one of the key themes of the entire saga. Jon Snow grew up a Stark and remained a Stark, even after learning he was a Targaryen. Theon grew up amongst the Starks, but never became one of them. Ramsay was a Bolton bastard, but that is precisely what defined his life. Blood is a given. Choice is character. And I think that's exactly what Martin is trying to say through Tyrion's story. Even if the dragon has 3 heads, and even if Tyrion is one of them, he will never cease to be who he has always been. A dwarf who has spent his whole life proving that wit is more important than height, cunning more important than a sword, and a well-chosen word worth more than an army. Aerys' blood won't make him a different person. It will simply add another layer of irony to a story that is already built on irony. Tywin hated Tyrion because he might not be his son, but it was Tyrion, not his blood children Jaime and Cersei, who inherited his intellect, his shrewdness, his ability to prevail when the odds are stacked against you. Jaina Lannister was right. Tyrion is Tywin's true son, in spirit, in character, in the way he thinks and acts, not by blood. And therein lies the bitter beauty of this theory. All his life, Tywin looked at Tyrion and saw someone else's child. He sought Aerys in him and found him. But he should have been looking for himself, because Tyrion is his reflection, an ugly, unwanted, unbearable reflection. But a reflection nonetheless. The most powerful man in Westeros died without recognizing his own heir, and that perhaps is the most Martini thing about the whole story. "You are not my son," said Tywin. Perhaps not. By blood, perhaps not. But in every other respect, in wit, in cunning, in the ability to survive where any other would have perished, Tyrion has proved a greater Lannister than all the other Lannisters put together. And if he ever rides a dragon, it won't mean he's found his true family. It will mean that the smallest lion turned out to be a dragon as well. And then watch out, Westeros. What do you think? Did the theory hold up or fall apart? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next analysis.